I'm Brian Derrick,
I'm Glennis Mahar.
and this is Vibes Only, and Glennis's birthday.
And my birthday.
Happy birthday!
Thank
Happy
you.
birthday!
What a day to have a birthday.
Yeah, big celebration today.
Woohoo. I actually woke up at like 4 a.m. and like I woke up from a nightmare and then I realized, oh, no,
Woke up into one.
into one. Yeah.
So we find ourselves not in the position that many of us obviously had hoped for, but what many people expected. I think you and I just had a conversation about this, but maybe coming as more of a shock to people who were less plugged in to the election than those who were.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a moment filled with a lot of fear, a lot of sadness and frustration for many, many people.
I am nothing if not anchored in fairness. And I say this like all the time. And the people have spoken. 70 million other people also spoke.
Right.
Those people who voted for Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, but the majority, truly the majority of Americans, the popular vote, want Donald Trump and JD Vance to be in the White House. So that is what we have.
I've struggled with how to put feelings into words over the last 48 plus hours because I personally will not bear the worst of Trump's policies.
Yes.
I live in New York. I'm a man. I am a US citizen. I will, of course, be impacted, as we all will be. But it doesn't feel right for me to get online and tell people it's going to be okay. We're going to be fine. Coming from me, what does that sort of say, right? And at the same time, it's not helpful to just doom and fantasize about worst case scenarios and that kind of thing. So it is a really difficult limbo that we find ourselves in. I have sort of centered online and just in my own personal life on community being a really important part of the solution, that being with your people who are feeling the same thing right now and are also afraid or also angry, um, in order to just have that connection and with no ulterior motive, right? Not to fight back in this moment or figure out what went wrong, or there's a lot of like pivoting to those types of solutions. But
Yeah.
I think they're just like being in community with other people who are experiencing the same thing right now is a really important part of the process that I'm just trying to not rush.
Yeah, I think that's valid, the not rushing. I that's my instinct is to immediately go into work mode
Yeah.
and like how what can we do like today to start combating, what I'm perceiving to be the worst of the Trump bans policies. But I do think that it is worth sitting in and recognizing the disappointment, mourning though what could have been. Watching Kamala Harris's concession speech yesterday afternoon was difficult for me to see what could have been. She spoke to staff like separately. She said something about, the work that you have done is still very good work, and that is banked work. Like we have made that progress, even though it's not the outcome that we wanted. Two things can be true. Yes, we may have lost the election, but we can also still believe in what we were advocating for. Getting to that point of feeling the energy to continue to advocate is something that will take some time because of the sheer loss and disappointment. But I do believe that we will continue to do the work.
And I think that is a natural but bad instinct for a lot of people to kind of throw their hands up and say, well, what a waste. Why did we even bother? Right. And that was part of my initial reaction as well, was to push back against that, to say, I don't regret a single minute. I worked 100 hours a week,
Yeah.
every week for the last 3 years towards all of these elections, not just the presidential. And I don't regret any of that. It's never a waste of time to fight for the things that you believe in. That's never a waste of time.
Yeah.
A lot of people are disappointed and upset about the 70 million votes for Trump. I think that it's helpful context to remember that if 120,000 or so of those votes had been different, you wouldn't have really cared so much about the 70 million votes. Like is it about 70 million people voting for Trump like I'm seeing people post online and that's proof that America is all of these things, or is it 120,000 people in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania that would have gone the other direction, that would have made us feel totally different about the state of America and that we were moving forward in all of these things.
Right.
In other words, we knew that Trump was going to get 70 million votes. We already knew that. That was not news to us election night.
Yeah.
It was news that about 120,000 in the blue wall swung in a particular direction.
Yeah.
And I know that there was like we're seeing all of this analysis, and there's a swing to the right generally, right? Like Trump overperformed broadly, and that's upsetting. But still, had 120,000 people decided differently in the Midwest, the narrative would be so different.
You have perspective on the outcome of the election, which I do think is something that I'm grateful for because someone said this to me yesterday. They said, "Do you feel like it's more difficult or less difficult because you're so deeply in the work?" And I think, quite frankly, it was less difficult for me. Of course, like my personal like commitment to the cause, like that was heartbreaking. But then I also was holding how close the election has been since, day one, especially the Harris Walls ticket, that it was a coin toss. I was so optimistic because I had to be because the work is like so difficult, right? To be having these conversations all the time and talking to Trump voters or talking to people who disagree with you on your bodily autonomy or gun rights, etc. You have to believe that you can win. You just have to.
Right.
When you don't, you're kind of slapped in the face with the reality of the American electorate, which you always knew.
There's also a danger in learning too much from the loss, right? That if we let Trump winning sort of inflate our enemy in a way in our own mind or in our strategy, like it could do more lasting damage that way as well. Across the world, we've seen incumbent governments pushed out when they were the ones who oversaw the post-pandemic inflationary era. And so there's also a very simple explanation here that isn't 70 million people don't want women to have bodily autonomy, hate trans people, hate immigrants, hate all of these things, but a different explanation that inflation was bad and it didn't come down fast enough to affect the election.
Yeah.
And that similar to Japan and the UK and Austria and Germany, the government that was in charge got blamed and pushed out. And Kamala just didn't have enough space between her and Biden and couldn't have, whether she threw darts at a dartboard with his face on it.
Yeah.
And so I don't want people to just sort of like tell themselves this story that centers on hate and sort of push themselves further into the shadows when there are other plausible explanations here as well.
Many, many millions of people were very discontented with the status quo,
Right.
and that is what we have learned.
I want to talk a little bit about other elections because you and I both focus just as much, if not more, on down ballot races.
Yeah.
So Democrats have lost control of the US Senate, which is not a surprise. Even if Harris won, that still seemed like the most likely outcome because of the map that we had in the Senate. But they picked up a couple more seats than we expected: Ohio, Montana.
Montana hurt me. As a former staffer for Max Baucus, who was senator from Montana, I got to work closely with John Tester, so
The House, at time of recording, is not called yet, but it looks like a really narrow majority either way, like one or two seats, but probably leaning Republican at this point because of the uphill climb. But that comes down to Arizona and California races that are counting pretty slow. Down ballot, I'll say losses first. We lost the Michigan House, but we still have a path to hold on to the Pennsylvania House and potentially tie the Arizona legislature. We don't have confirmed results yet for the Minnesota House. We held onto a pro democracy majority on the Michigan Supreme Court, flipped a seat on the Kentucky Supreme Court. We broke the supermajorities in North Carolina. We elected Josh Stein instead of Mark Robinson. We elected Jeff Jackson as Attorney General. And it looks like we're going to hold on to the Montana Supreme Court majority as well, which was a big focus of oaths this cycle.
We also had some other substantial wins in the Senate. Black women will serve in the same time in the United States Senate. Angela Alsobrooks in Maryland and Lisa Blunt Rochester in Delaware. And then Sarah McBride in the House. She will be the first openly trans member of Congress, period.
Period. The other source of a lot of meaningful wins, right? I just want to emphasize that these are not like consolation prizes.
Right.
This is how our democracy works, that lots of different people are making decisions about our lives. And every time we score a notch, a win in one of these offices, it actually does impact the lives of millions of people. We won 7 reproductive rights ballot measures that are securing the rights of over 50 million people. We voted to guarantee paid sick leave in 3 states and increase the minimum wage in 2 states. We defeated voucher programs that would siphon money away from public schools in 3 states, rejected Ron DeSantis's school board politicization play in Florida. And I think that that's also important for us to acknowledge, right?
Yes.
It's okay to still be sad, but if we agree that this is a long game and a game of chess, not checkers, then we made some moves, and that's important.
We made some moves.
Let's talk a little bit about what the next couple weeks looks like. There's a lot of conversation about Biden trying to Trump proof DC a bit more.
Yeah, I have been seeing, even though, I'm someone who needs to laugh in times of sadness, some really funny things happening online about people saying, "Joe Biden, don't leave. Don't leave." And I'm like, well, he's gotta go. Tell me about like the actual things that people are talking about.
I want to preface by saying I think it's a little bit of a lefty pipe dream. I don't think this has any shot at happening, but people are asking Sotomayor to step down from the Supreme Court right now and have Chuck Schumer confirm somebody new while we control both the White House and Senate.
What do you think about that?
I mean, she should have done it in June.
Yeah.
No question, she should have done it in June. And I posted about it and we'll take that one. I mean, at this point, we just have to assume and hope and pray that she stays on for at least 5 more years.
Whew.
She's turning 70 or already turned 70. I don't remember
She's
anymore.
70, I believe.
The number 1, 2, and 3 thing that we would ask from DC right now is confirmations. There are still, I think, 47 vacancies in the federal judiciary, but the problem is Republicans will no longer participate, and you actually need them. Even though they vote against the judges overall, you need their help to get through the process of getting to the vote because of the way that the Senate is set up, which is arcane, but it is what it is. So they won't be able to do a ton there.
Wasn't it Tommy Tuberville, who was holding up all of those
Right.
confirmations, like Minority Rule 101? So we do need them.
Biden can issue more guidance to the various federal agencies about how they should be doing their jobs, people who are going to stay. Trump has threatened to do a lot of things, but potentially replace a lot of federal employees. And so there's risk there. But the reality is, as we've seen with every administration, really since George Bush, staffing an administration, even at the cabinet level, is incredibly slow. And you can anticipate that a lot of things that Biden put in place will still be around a year from now, or 2 years from now, or 3 years from now, right? Like, we were still replacing people and trying to get our people in up until this election. Like, you're never done. And so to that end, I think that the more Biden is able to push in within like federal agencies, there's like helpful things to be done. Then after that, we are hoping for the highest levels of incompetency from the Trump administration to just keep things moving slow.
So slow. Yeah. I mean, that's what I'm holding out hope for, is that they're not good at their job.
The other thing we can expect for the next couple of weeks is a lot of postmortem and Monday Monday quarterbacking. My caveats and warnings for people there. Jon Stewart did a great piece on how the lesson learned after every election usually ends up being wrong.
Here's what we know is that we don't really know anything, and that we're going to come out of this election and we're going to make all kind of pronouncements about what this country is and what this world is. And the truth is, we're not really going to know shit.
The thing that we think in the couple weeks after usually is different than what ends up in place 4 years later. Some examples of that were after Hillary lost, everyone said we need someone from like a younger generation, we need new leadership. And then we picked Joe Biden and he won.
Right.
After January 6th, everyone said that Trump was dead, like out of Washington.
Donald Trump will never be allowed to set foot in the Capitol again. Never.
And here we are. And like the list goes on, right? So I think that people should turn down the volume on that as much as possible, at least until the voter file is out.
Pause there. Can you explain? Tell the audience what you mean by a voter file.
Right. So it's public record, not who you vote for, but who votes. And we don't get the complete voter files, which is the actual data as to who voted and who didn't, until the spring. It's different in every state, but like a complete national voter file will not be available until like March or April. That is the data that tells us what percent of Black men voted and what percent of Latino men 18 to 29 voted.
White women. Yeah.
The data that people are on TV talking about right now is from exit polling, which is literally standing outside of a polling place and asking people their opinions and then waiting the results of that. So if you don't think that polling is good, which involves usually online responses and phone surveys and in person, like all these different ways to contact people,
Then let me tell you about exit
then
polls.
let me tell you about exit polls. Why the heck do you think that that's accurate? It's wild to me that the same people who are like blasting the polls as useless are now like championing like 92% of Black women voted for Kamala Harris. We do not know that yet.
No, right.
Like we don't know.
I think, but Brian, in all fairness, I think people are just like grasping for straws because
Yeah.
people want to control what they can and want clarity on what happened. But I do think it's good advice, and like people should hold this, that we won't really have full voter file clarity until the spring.
The other component that I'm seeing and hearing about are some people just immediately pivoting to solutions, right? In order to win in the future, Democrats need to blank. They need to put this kind of person, they need to focus on this kind of voter, they need to change the way they do this, the way they talk about this, the issue they focus on. And I will also say that those people are wrong about what 2028 will look like, because it will have a lot to do with what happens in the next couple years. And so we can't know that yet. So I would also take all of those things with a grain of salt, or a huge 50-gallon drum of salt,
Right.
because we just don't know.
Yeah, there's a lot of unknowns right now, and I think that's what's really, again, disorienting and scary for people.
It's like saying in 2016 what the 2020 election would be about, and we didn't know about the pandemic. It's like saying in 2020 what the 2024 election was going to be about, and we didn't know that inflation was going to be as bad, and we didn't know that Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned on the timeline that it was. We don't know.
Right, and, like, that's why we did so exceedingly well in the midterms, which led to some Democratic delusion around our performance in 2024. Like, everything is connected, but because we just don't know, we don't know.
Not knowing sucks. It's so uncomfortable.
Mhm.
We have a natural tendency, I think, to look to people who tell you they have the solution and make you believe it. And that's why Trump is so compelling, right? Is that he makes you believe that he has a solution. Of course, we don't believe that.
Right.
People like a security blanket, even if they won't admit that. And there's not a lot of that to go around right now. And I'm sure that's not what people want to hear, but I think that it's better to not have one and lean on each other and all of these other things that we're talking about in that type of community, rather than a false one that is going to lead you down the wrong path. The energy that I'm channeling right now:
Yes, tell me.
gratitude, just genuinely so grateful for all of the people who participated and engaged in this election. Like we said before, I think it's never a waste of time to fight for the things that you believe in. And I'm so grateful for the incredible effort that we saw from people. So many first time voters, phone bankers, donors, like all these
Yes.
things. And that gives me a lot of hope, and that fills me with gratitude. I'm feeling very humble.
Mm.
I will not change my values, but I'm trying to be open to everything else being potentially wrong, right? Is it the wrong strategy? Is it the wrong talking point? Is it the wrong, like, I want to not be defensive about those things. I will not change what I believe, but how we fight for it, I'm open to changing.
I completely agree. I said to someone yesterday, I am not going to give up the fight, but I am willing to have a conversation about the methods of how we reach voters and effectively communicate our vision for this country.
Absolutely. I think the last energy at this moment that I'm trying to channel is like curiosity, honestly.
Bingo.
And maybe that seems naive to some, but I think that it is a learning moment. I feel like I have a lot more to understand about people who voted in ways that I don't agree with. I think I have a lot to understand about MAGA that maybe I thought I understood and don't. And that's not to say that I empathize or sympathize,
Or agree with.
but just that, like, we have to understand there are blind spots in my knowledge that I feel like I will take time to try to fill in. And of course, like, as determined as ever. There's no question there. Like, I'm not giving up on this. I'm not going away. I know you're not either.
No, I'm not. You'll have to pull democracy out of my cold, dead hands.
Yeah, exactly. That's not going to change. Until then, and I don't know when then is,
Yeah,
let's lean on each other and find comfort where we can, find strength from where we know we will. We'll take it a day at a time.
onwards.